to the 30th anniversary of Washington Concert Opera. I'm Peter Russell, who with my spouse Stephen Kraut was one of the co-founders of this wonderful institution 30 years ago. How thrilling to be here this evening to celebrate with the wonderful current artistic director of Washington Concert Opera, Antony Walker, with a very apropos celebration of Bel Canto. Now, if you go back over the history of Washington Concert Opera and its 30 years and look at the number of full-length operas that have been presented by the company, nearly half of the operas that have been performed have been by Bel Canto composers, specifically Vincenzo Bellini, Gioacchino Rossini, and Gaetano Donizetti. And some of those composers' operas, specifically Bellini's I Capuletti e Montecchi, I Puritani, La Sonnambula, Donizetti's La Favorita or La Favorite, have been performed more than once. And if you add into that the operas that were composed by the young Giuseppe Verdi, when that composer was still emulating in many ways the vocal lines and the instrumentation of Bel Canto composers, then the number of Bel Canto-ish operas performed by Washington Concert Opera is more than half of the institution's archive. Now, this is both a kind of affinity and something that Antony Walker is very passionate about, but we also happen to live in an era during which these operas are extraordinarily castable, including the singers that we're going to be hearing this evening, soprano Angela Meade, mezzo-soprano Vivica Genaux, and in his Washington area debut, the Italian tenor Michele Angelini. The evening will kick off with an overture that is still very popular as a concert staple, Rossini's La Gazza, Ladra, even though the opera itself is very rarely performed today. It received its premiere in Milan in 1817. It has a snare drum roll opening. It has a very martial first section, and followed by a kind of mysterious string motif, riffs for the woodwinds, and a kind of patented Rossinian crescendo. If you're wondering what the title means, it means the thieving magpie. And in brief, the story of the opera, which is neither tragic nor or comical, but falls into the unique genre of semi-seria, half serious, is about a young serving girl named Ninetta who wants to marry a nobleman, but her future mother-in-law suspects her of stealing silver from the household. Circumstantial evidence is very damning. She's sentenced to death, and at the 11th hour, everybody finds out that the silver was actually stolen by the thieving magpie of the title, who has been putting it in her nest in the church bell tower. So we move on. A piece that was deemed immortal in the early part of the 19th century from its premiere at the Opéra Comique in 1825 was Boieldieu's La Dame Blanche, the White Lady, based on episodes from count them five different Sir Walter Scott novels. Almost never performed today, despite the fact that between its premiere in 1862, it racked up a booming 1,000 performances at the Comique. The gist of the story is that a young soldier by the name of George Brown, and this takes place in Scotland, seeks billeting overnight in Avenel Manor, where he is informed that the White Lady of the opera's title is a kind of benevolent spirit, a ghost who guards over the manor. She is actually the young ward, Anna, of the steward of the estate, who drapes herself in white veils and gets up to various acts of mischief. Upon hearing this, Georges is very excited and intrigued, and in this lovely lilting piece, Viens gentille dame, he summons the White Lady. It builds to quite a froth, but then the lilting melody returns and it ends on a whisper. We hear three selections tonight from the opera by Donizetti, Lucrezia Borgia, which is based on a drama by Victor Hugo. It's a very fictionalized account of the life of the Duchess of Ferrara from the 16th century, who in real life was more victim than the kind of predatory menace that she's portrayed in both the Hugo play and also in this opera. The opera is still occasionally revived in staged productions. Washington National Opera did it as recently as 2008 with Renee Fleming and Sandra Radvanovsky alternating in the title role. And Renee Fleming also has sung it at La Scala and San Francisco. But the piece crops up as often as not as a concert piece. And perhaps no opera in concert opera American history is more famous than the night in 1965 when Marilyn Horne had to withdraw due to pregnancy from performing the title role in this opera, and a completely unheralded Spanish soprano by the name of Montserrat Caballé filled in for her and scored an absolute triumph. Hint, you can find it on YouTube as a bootleg recording in pretty darn good sound. Concert opera performed this work in 1989, and the story behind that is that a Romanian soprano named Nelly Miricioiu, who ended up being quite popular with local audiences, had made a triumphant debut with Washington National Opera the year prior as Violetta in La Traviata. We went to her and said, "We want you to do something with us. What would you like to do?" Blank check. And she said, the title role in Lucrezia Borgia. We said, done deal. The pieces that we're going to hear this evening are all from the second and final act of the work. They include the drinking song, or Brindisi, that is sung by the trouser mezzo-soprano part of Maffeo Orsini in the final scene, the gist of which is he who laughs last laughs best. It's in 2 strophes. Il segreto per esser felici, the secret of being happy. We also hear from the scene just prior to that a duet in which Orsini and his best friend, Gennaro, pledge eternal friendship. Now, Gennaro is the son of Lucrezia Borgia, but he doesn't know that yet. She did not want her husband, the Duke of Ferrara, Alfonso, to know about the birth of this child. So she pawned him off to be raised by a poor fisherman. She sent money furtively so that he wouldn't grow up in dire poverty. But the Borgia family and Lucrezia generally have had a terrible reputation in Ferrara, and so Gennaro's friends have insulted Lucrezia in the prologue to the piece and have even gone so far as to deface the Borgia palace by removing the B so that it says orgia, which is the Italian word for orgy. As part of this duet, Gennaro and Orsini decide that they will not take the advice that Lucrezia gave Gennaro, which is to basically get out of Dodge because her husband has it in for him and his life is at stake, but that they will stay that evening and attend a party together, a decision that literally proves fatal to them both. And we then hear the finale in the second half of the concert, in which Lucrezia, in a piece that has a horn obbligato to it, begs Gennaro, having poisoned inadvertently her own son, in addition to his friends, in retaliation for their having insulted her in that aforementioned prologue, she begs him to drink an antidote that will save his life. He is so horrified to find out that he is her son and that his friends are all going to die and that there isn't enough antidote to save them all that he refuses. And so Lucrezia, in horror, looks on as her own son dies in her arms. We also have this evening a wonderful rondo from the adaptation by Hector Berlioz of Gluck's Orphée et Euridice. Now, over the course of its history, from the time that Gluck's adaptation of the Greek Orpheus myth had its premiere in Vienna in 1762, the title role in that opera has been sung variously by castrati, the type of high-pitched French tenor known as the haut contre. It's been sung by mezzo-sopranos, contraltos, tenors, and baritones. But by the time we reached the 1850s, French orchestras were tuning to such an extraordinarily high pitch. You may know that in America today and worldwide, orchestras tune to A equals 440. Well, back then, French orchestras tuned to A equals 496, which meant that it was so high that haut contres could no longer perform the piece as they had when Gluck was still living and it received its French premiere without there being disfiguring transpositions of the key solos for Orpheus. So the very enterprising impresario of the théâtre lyrique, Léon Carvalho, went to the composer Hector Berlioz, knowing that Berlioz revered the operas of Christoph Willibald Gluck, and was also a very close personal friend of a mezzo-soprano, Pauline Viardot, and said, why don't you do your own adaptation, your own arrangement of Gluck's Orphée, but specifically with the voice of Madame Viardot in mind. Now, a word or two about Viardot, because in addition to being one of the few bankable superstar singers of her day, she was an absolutely remarkable individual. She aspired initially to be a pianist. Her mother made her give that up to pursue singing, and yet she played the piano so well that both Franz Liszt and Frédéric Chopin thought extremely highly of her keyboard chops. She was so inspired as a singer that the authors Alfred de Musset and Ivan Turgenev fell madly in love with her. De Musset proposed marriage, and yet Viardot's good friend Georges Sand, Chopin's sometime paramour, said, oh, no, 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 dear. De Musset has no money. You have to marry someone who actually can pay the bills. So she ended up marrying the director of the Opéra, the Théâtre Italien in Paris instead. He was 20 years her senior, and yet they had a very long, very happy marriage. She created the part of Fidèse in Meyerbeer's Le Prophète, and also created Brahms's Alto Rhapsody. The premiere of Berlioz's adaptation of Orphée for her at the Théâtre Lyrique in 1859 was a triumph. It sold out every performance. Berlioz conducted it. So it was a huge personal success for both composer, conductor, and star. Interestingly enough, Camille Saint-Saëns, who assisted Berlioz in arranging this piece for Viardot, when he wrote his opera Samson et Dalila, Samson and Delilah, asked Viardot to create the part of Delilah. She refused, saying, but my dear, I am too old. The piece, Amour ranime mon courage, is both defiant and optimistic, in addition to being very florid. Orpheus invokes the god of love to inspire him so that he will overcome the terrors of Hades to bring back his beloved and deceased wife Euridice, and he is confident that with that help and support he will be able to do so.